All right. Hello and welcome to the Historic Homeowner Tax Credit Workshop. Thank you for joining us tonight. Hope all is well with all of you. And tonight we're going to embark on a journey through time, architecture, and most importantly, your wallets. You heard me right. Tonight we're diving into the fascinating world of historic tax credits. Before we kick things off, I'd like to introduce you to this dynamic duo, Preservation Buffalo Niagara and Preservation Studios. PBN, we're the folks that eat, sleep, and dream about cornices, Corinthian columns, and gingerbread trim. Our mission is to preserve Buffalo's architectural heritage, one restored facade at a time. You can think of us as sort of the matchmakers between history and homeowners. And tonight we are joined by Preservation Studios, our region's full service historic preservation consulting firm, and they specialize in helping people like you apply for historic tax credits. First up, we can meet Tom Yachts, the founder and the director of municipal services for Preservation Studios. Next up, we have Eric King, a partner and the director of operations. And let's not forget Haley Wright, their intern extraordinaire. Now, why are we all here tonight? Three magic words. We're here, well, saving you money. If you've ever wondered how to restore that vintage porch without breaking the bank, historic tax credits are going to be your secret weapon. Whether you're fixing up a Victorian gem or a mid-century modern masterpiece, these credits can turn your renovation dreams into reality. So what are we going to get into tonight? We're going to break down the tax credit process bite by bite. We'll learn a little bit about the qualified rehabilitation expenditures, or the QREs, eligibility criteria, and the art of working with your SHPO representative throughout this entire process. And hopefully we'll be able to sprinkle in a few laughs and some quirky historical anecdotes throughout the night. Preservation can be kind of fun. So grab a mug, grab your notepad and a pen, and we're going to talk some historic tax credits. I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the team at Preservation Studios. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. I really appreciate your very vociferous support for historic preservation, as Preservation Buffalo Niagara is certainly all about. I am Tom Yachts, and as Brandon mentioned, I was the founder of Preservation Studios. I founded the organization, the company, in 2002 when I got a master's degree in architecture from the SUNY Buffalo School of Architecture and Planning. And we've grown now to a staff of 10 of us, offering full service historic preservation consulting firms across New York State and in neighboring states, and hopefully in California that just passed a residential historic tax credit. So that's what we're here about today. We've been providing this service about advising people on the residential tax credit to our neighbors, where our office is in the Hamlin Park Historic District. And we decided that we would partner with Preservation Buffalo Niagara and offer this to the rest of the city and to neighboring localities. And bringing it online, as we've done, we started off with an in-person one in January at the Unitarian Universalist Church on Elmwood and West Ferry in Buffalo. And then we've gone now to monthly online ones so that more people could participate. And we're going to be doing some in-person ones again in late May and in June in hopefully Niagara Falls and possibly the Broadway Fillmore neighborhood. But I am also welcoming you from the Central Coast of California. I'm in the Monterey Peninsula, the little seaside community of Carmel by the Sea. My wife and I have the privilege of living winters and early spring in Greystone Cottage, which is what you see behind me here. It's like your house. It is a historic home built in 1928, and it is designated. And homes like yours and Greystone are designated to recognize their contribution to the history of the community. And what we are talking about today is a residential tax credit that is designed to assist owners of historic homes like you. It recognizes that you contribute to the community by maintaining your historic home and its integrity, and it assists you in keeping up that integrity by providing historic tax credits. Before we get into the webinar and I turn this over to Haley, I'll just mention that in the room with me at the moment is my little 13-pound Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, who is very small, but who can snore louder than anything you can imagine. So if you hear any snoring going on during this workshop, I want to assure you it is not I who is snoring. It is Gracie. So I would like now to turn this over to Haley.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Firstly, I just wanted to go over the agenda of what we will be looking at today. And Tom and Brandon gave a brief introduction. So then we'll move on to eligibility, qualifications, QREs, examples, and then the application. So eligibility. The Historic Homeownership Rehabilitation Credit Program offers a state income tax credit equal to 20% of the qualified rehabilitation expenses. So this includes repairs, maintenance, and upgrades to a historic home. Moving on to historic districts. Is your home in a qualifying historic neighborhood? The map on the right side is hand-drawn, so it is not 100% accurate. A few of these neighborhoods include the Elmwood, East and West, Linwood, Hamlin Park, which is both local and National Register, Broadway Fillmore, Allentown, Fargo Estates, West Village, and Prospect Hill. Qualifications. So the applicant must own and live in the house. The house must be listed in the New York State and National Register of Historic Places individually or as a contributing building within the historic district. Rehabilitation expenses must be $5,000 or more, with a minimum of 5% of that being spent on exterior work. And this is very important. All projects must be approved prior to when the work begins. QREs, or Qualified Rehabilitation Expenditures, are a tax incentive offered by the New York State for the rehabilitation of historic residential and historic commercial properties. Examples of this include roofs, gutters, cabinets, and more. And I will hand it back over to Tom.
Okay, we want to talk a little bit about how this actually works with your property. One of the things that you should know is that based on a person's income, if your income is at or less than $60,000, the tax credit process waives the fees for you. So you do not have to do any fees if you are at an income level of 60,000 or less. And if your tax credit is greater than your tax liability that year, you will get it back as a refund. So it's really a very valuable asset to have. Now, some of you are in single-family owner-occupied homes. Some others are in multiple, and there's a difference in how the process works with this. An example that we have up in front of us for over 60 years was a single-family home, and then it became a residence with a commercial use. It was a bed and breakfast, and if during the time that it was a single family home, if the tax credit had been available at that time, the family could have had the full 20% of any of the qualified rehabilitation expenses. And believe me, from having lived in that home and owned it for 17 years, I can tell you there were plenty of qualified rehabilitation expenses that were going to take place. And I'm sure you have that yourself. But when it became a bed and breakfast, then only a portion of that could be. So if a qualified rehabilitation expense was for a roof or something that affected the entire property, only that portion that applied to the owner would be what could be the percentage of the use could be. And we'll give some examples of this so it gives you a better idea of what we're talking about. So if you're in a single family home and it's yours and you are the owner, then you'll get 20% of your qualified rehabilitation expenses. However, if you do have an income earning portion of it, it could be, as I said, a bed and breakfast. It could be a commercial space. Some homes have a small commercial space with them. It could be a professional office that's in there. But more than likely, especially if you're in the city of Buffalo, you might own one of Buffalo's famous flats. The Buffalo Flats are some of the most unique properties that I have ever seen in the many places that I've lived, where it seems like an entire home sits on top of another entire home. They're pretty amazing. And Buffalo Flats are an example that I'm going to give you a little more information about. So if we go on to the next slide, whoever is operating the slides, there we go. Here's an example of a case of Buffalo Flats. This is the famous Dollar House. You may have read about this a number of years ago. A young man who happens to now be a partner in our firm bought this house from the city for $1 so that it would not be demolished. And $120,000 worth of QREs later, he has the house that you see on the right. And the project was split because there was an apartment on the first floor and an apartment on the second floor, and they each occupied approximately 50% of the property. So if we go on to the next slide, we can see here's an example of some of the rehabilitation that he did. And another slide, I think, will show us a little. Oh, we need to go back one. Okay. You know, I think it's a couple of slides ahead that we have the sheet that has Mike's expenses on it. If we can try moving a couple of slides ahead, I think we'll get there. It is. Okay, thank you. So this will give you an idea of how he worked that out. It's not nearly as complicated as it sounds, I can tell you that. And Mike did all of this himself. And he also did a lot of the work himself, which is pretty remarkable. But it shows you if you are in a homeowner with a commercial unit building, you split it by the amount of occupancy. And so in his case, it was 50% for each. So in the case of his search and abstract and survey that you see there, that was $1,105, he split that exactly in half. Half of it was the homeowner, half of it was the commercial, which meant that he would then be able to get the homeowner credit on that $552.50 that you see. You can go down a little further and you see that he created porch jams on the porch. Well, the porch was on the first floor, which was for the commercial unit. So that expense was on the commercial side. He couldn't claim that on the homeowner side. Now, what it doesn't show you on here, but I have a listing of many other ones that he did. The upper bathroom needed to be completely replaced. So all of that expense was the homeowner expense. So he got fully for that amount on there. And the same thing with the upper kitchen. The lower kitchen needed a minor amount of work. So he had $749 worth of QREs for the lower kitchen. But for the upper kitchen, the one that he was going to live with, it was more like $6,400 worth of work. So he was able to count those QREs there, whereas he couldn't have counted the QREs on the other. This particular case, and it's not typical of them, but this particular case, Mike also, because he's did an expenditure of $120,000 on this house, he also claimed the commercial credit. That is more complicated. And if any of you were going to do that kind of work, we would be happy to give you some more information on that, and so would the SHPO. But for in general, if you're going to claim the homeowner's place, any work that you do in your own unit, you can claim it all. Any work that you do that's shared, for example, the roof or the siding or anything related to the body of the exterior frame of the house, that is going to be 50% for you, 50% for the commercial use, unless you have your percentages for your income tax done in a different way. I hope that didn't sound too confusing, but again, in the question and answers, we can clear some things up. Now, if you can go back one slide for me. This was a single family. This is a single family residence in the Elmwood Village. It's a large single family residence in the Elmwood Village, and it had it's owner occupied, and it had a window project done that new storm windows were created. And if you look at the photo, you'll see there in these photos alone, there are 5 different types of windows. So this was a pretty substantial project, costing over $53,000. The windows had to be custom made because of the sizes of the existing windows that were there. The owners had previously rehabilitated the windows, the original windows of the house themselves, and these were the storm windows that they are working with here. And they also painted the existing windows and rehabilitated the sills and painted the exterior trim on the house. As I said, it was over $50,000, and they were able to get the full 20% because it's owner occupied without a rental income. And again, I'm sure that some of this seemed a little confusing, and if you have questions in the question and answer period, or at the end, we'll show you some links to us and to the SHPO where you would be able to ask some questions about that. Now, the application itself, as applications go, and as the State Historic Preservation Office goes, as most bureaucracy goes, this is an easy one. It was designed to be easy for you to use. Essentially, what you do is answer a series of questions that you can answer right online. What we have in front of us right now is the original paper application. And if for some reason you are not comfortable with the online submission, or if you have some difficulty using the online submission, you can use the paper application. They will accept that. They would prefer that you use the online, and to be perfectly honest with you, it's so much easier. But if it's not something that works out for you, you still can do the original paper one. And there's a part 1, and there's a part 2, and there's a part 3, but they're really all essentially the same project when you look at what they're asking you for. Part 1 is just asking for general information about the property, verifying that it is historically designated and that it retained its significance, and then information about you as the owner of the property. Part 2 is going, in fact, I think if we go to the next slide, we might have, no, we don't have an example of part 2. Well, part 2 is going to be a series of boxes that will ask you to fill in what the existing condition is, and then what you're going to do. So say, for example, your project is a very typical project that's done in residences, that you're replacing your roof. So maybe you have a roof that's got 3 layers of shingles on it. They're starting to curl, or they're blowing off in the wind. You just explain that, roof, 3 layers of shingles, starting to curl, getting some leaking. That's all you have to say. And then in the next box, it's going to ask what you're going to do. You're going to do a tear off. You're going to repair any of the understructure that needs to be repaired. And then you're going to put on a new roof, and you'll explain what the roof is. Okay. And so that's what you'll do for each of the things that you're going to do here, is just on one side, explain what the existing condition is. On the other side, explain what you're going to do. Another example could be that maybe you have rotted wood on your porch. Unfortunately, that happens a lot. We've lost a lot of beautiful porches in Buffalo because of that. But this program helps you to keep that from happening, and you can work on it using these tax credits. So you would just explain that maybe you have some rotting occurring in the eaves of your porch, or maybe we had an example in a home that Louise and I owned that it had not totally been constructed correctly on a porch pier, and it had rotted underneath because of the fact that it allowed the moisture to go in there. So it would be just a case you would explain, rotted wood needed to be rebuilt, and then on your other side at the blocks, you'll explain that that's what you're going to do. And then they're going to ask that you submit photos to go with this. We mentioned earlier that the photos can be directly uploaded onto there. But there's an easier way if you are, have the facility to do this, is to just create either a Word document or a PDF that has all the photos on it. Because then say that you're going to submit 30 photos, and because your project is a big one, well, you'd have to upload 30 photos individually. But if you put them all on a Word document or a PDF, you upload one thing. So that's a possibility for you. And again, if you have any difficulty with either way of doing it, the SHPO says you can email them to them. They will be fine with that. Or you can mail them a flash drive with the photos on. They just want to see the photos, that's all. JPEGs is what they would like to receive. After all of that is submitted and you get your approval, well, then you go ahead to do your work. And I urge you not to start your project unless you have that approval first. If you have an emergency situation, we had an emergency one time, a tree fell on our porch and pretty much destroyed the porch. So you've got an emergency situation there. Well, you contact the SHPO, you let them know what you're going to do, and they will tell you, just send me this and this, mostly photographs, and we will then do the application once you get your process started. But other than that, if it's not an emergency situation, they want you to have the approval first. And once you do that, you can do your project. When your project is done, the part 3 is very simple. It's pretty much the same listing that you gave them in the part 2, except now you're going to show them what you actually did. Because sometimes you don't do everything that you intended to do. I mean, partway through a project, you can suddenly find out that something that you thought was going to have an estimated cost of $5,000 has an actual cost of more like $12,000. Well, that means you can't do everything else in your project. So in the part 3, all you're doing is telling them, what did you really do? And explain what it is, put down the actual cost versus the estimated cost that you would have put in the original parts of the application. And when you put the actual cost down, that's how you determine your QREs. So this is showing you right now on this screen, the screen that you'll get, where it asks you to submit part 1 and part 2, and then any amendments that you're doing. Amendments would just be as if for some reason something changed, as I said before, while you were doing the project. And then finally, when you're done, you submit the part 3 application. The way this works is that you need to fill in all of the blanks with that in order to go on. However, you can save it. So you don't have to, if you're not done with it and you need to leave the page, you don't lose it. You are able to save that that document that has been uploaded at that point. And essentially that's it with the parts 1, parts 2, part 1, part 2, part 3, and the amendments. And as I say, it's a very, very easy application, intended to be very easy. You can contact us at Preservation Studios for help, or the SHPO, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Finally, I just wanted to put this chart up, or someone wanted to put it up anyway, that explains the federal and state historic preservation tax credits to you. Many states in our country do not have a residential tax credit. I mentioned to you that California just got theirs, and New York has had theirs for quite some time. And so there is a federal tax credit, but the federal tax credit is not residential. The federal tax credit is commercial. And the commercial tax credit that is from the federal government is a 20% tax credit. It would be for commercial properties or for the commercial portion of a rental property like we talked before. The state commercial tax credit is 40%. And then there are some conditions that would allow the state commercial credit to be 30%. So that means that all of these historic preservation commercial rehabs that you're seeing done around Western New York and actually around the rest of New York State as well, they're being done with 40 or 50% historic preservation tax credits. Think about that. Some of these projects are $5, $8, $10 million projects, and they're getting half of that back. They're getting $5 million back. Why is that such a benefit? Why would they give anyone something like that? Part of it is because in our community, especially, the return on investment is not as great as it is in the community that I'm in right now, in Carmel by the Sea, California, where rentals are multiple times what they are in Western New York. but the costs are pretty much the same. So this is an incentive for people who have commercial properties and cannot get the return that they would with keeping its historic integrity and doing it the right way. It's a great incentive for them to do that. The homeowners, it's only a state credit and it's a 20% credit, but it's a very good credit, 20%, because it allows you to do so many things. And there's a list on the website of the QREs, and it really is just a suggestion of QREs. There are so many, many more. So what you need to do, or what you should do, is when you get a project ready to go, don't base it on what you think they're going to accept. Base it on what you need to do, and then contact us or contact the SHPO, and they will let you know, or we will let you know, yes, this one you can do, this one you cannot do, and get the credits. So with all of that said, just moving on at the end here, here's our contact information. You can contact Preservation Buffalo Niagara, info@PBN Saves. You can contact me at Preservation Studios. My email address is there. And the person at the SHPO with whom you'll work, one of the easiest people I have had to deal with in a bureaucracy in my many years of working, Fran Stern. She's a wonderful person who wants to make this program easy for you. And you just email her at francis.stern@parksnewyork.gov. And that, again, any help from any of those will come to you. So that's pretty much what I have to say. Brandon, anything more from PBN?
No, nothing to weigh in just yet.
Great. Well, I guess with that, Brandon, unless you want to do any plugs, I guess we can dive into some Q&A. We had a ton of great questions in the chat as well as in the question and answer function. And just to kind of reiterate, we're focusing on the historic homeowner credit with this presentation. As Tom kind of mentioned, part of this is to demystify this program. It's very easy to use, and as you mentioned, Fran is an amazing ambassador for the program. And so really trying to get folks to realize this is something you can do yourself. You don't need a consultant for. We are historic preservation consultants, and we primarily focus on the commercial tax credit application because that is a lot more complicated. It has to go to National Park Service. This program is a lot more straightforward, and it has people who are there and able to be reached to answer your questions. So just to kind of differentiate, we're teaming up with PBN here really to kind of help enable folks to feel that they can dive into this without having to go out there and find someone. So to just kind of dig through some of the questions, and I'm going to go in order that I received them. So folks who are in the Q&A, you'll be in there as well. But one of the first questions was, how do I know if my home's in a district? And this is a little tricky because there's a lot of information online about local historic districts, National Register historic districts. Some of the maps are very old. But the easiest way, if you think you're in a historic district and you see one of these maps, is just to reach out to Fran and say, this is my address. Am I eligible? They have a website called the Cultural Resource Inventory System, which is an excellent resource, but it has quite a bit of information on it, much of which is not helpful. So geared in some ways towards consultants, folks who are working environmental review. So it has a ton of information that might be a little too much. But if you already think you're in a historic district, reach out to Fran, say, I just want to confirm if I am a contributing structure to this historic district. And someone asked similarly, how do you show that your house is a contributing structure? As Tom and Haley pointed out, the first part of the application just says, are you in a historic district? And you check yes. Someone asked if these pages will be available. We can definitely circulate them if folks reach out to us. But we're hoping that this presentation will be uploaded onto YouTube at some point. We're still figuring out whether when that'll be, but we'll get something out there. Someone asked about a single family home that's zoned for incidental commercial activity, but is not being used for generating income. So really this program, if it's homeowner occupied and it's the primary residence and it's in a historic district and is contributing, you're eligible as long as it meets the other requirements about being in a qualifying census tract and or in a city with a poverty rate higher than 15%. So if you meet all those criteria and it's your primary home, it qualifies. And actually, it can even apply to second homes. So if you have a vacation property that is not income producing, or you share ownership of a house that a family member is living in, you can still use the program in that instance as well. As long as it's not income producing primarily, you can you can access the homeowner credit there.
I'd like to
Someone-
just add on to what Derek just said and reiterate what he said, that it's not uncommon for people to have a home that was built as 2 units, but is occupied as a single family. At one point in our lives, Louise and I owned a home like that. We occupied the entire house, but it was built as a 2-family house. So we would have qualified for the full 20% there. The example I gave you of the house with the windows, that actually was built as a 2-family home, but a single family was occupying it, and that was their home, their residence. So that qualified for the full 20% as a single home occupancy.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, and if there's questions about that, definitely reach out to Fran and just say, here's kind of what the situation was. Even if it was a commercial building, it was a fully built out commercial building and it was converted to a residence at some point, you should be eligible to claim the credits on it. If you are renting out half of it, that's where it gets a little tricky. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few questions. But yeah, definitely if it's a primary residence and you are living in it, you should be able to claim this credit. Someone asked a little bit about building codes for a historic preservation project. It's a little bit beyond the scope of this presentation. And generally speaking, I would defer to your architect. If you're going down to permits and inspection, and they're saying it has to be this height. Usually, if you're talking about like a railing or something, usually codes come first. There are certain things that are exempted through various historic property exemptions. But when it comes to a lot of the historic tax credit programs, they're going to defer to whatever is a code requirement. And life safety is life safety. So we're not necessarily going to weigh in on any specifics, but if I would definitely defer to your architect or whoever is helping you navigate permitting process, or whatever permit office says is kind of what's in a go. But that's definitely something that's a little outside of this. If you do have to come up with like a custom railing, however, in order to make it meet life safety, as well as still kind of have some historic characteristics, that's an eligible QRE. If you have to hire an architect to help you design something that is that'll meet code and still be compliant with this program, that's an eligible expense. So definitely, if you're going through that process and you have to make it a little more expensive to meet both worlds, definitely you can earn that 20% on it. One of the things one of the questions that came up was adding things like a skylight during a roof replacement. And Tom, I don't know if you want to weigh in on this, or if we just say, when there's something that's very specific to your house or your project, just run it by Fran. But I don't know if you want to weigh in a little bit on.
Well, from the Secretary of the Interior standards, something like that. It's interesting you bring that up, because the house I'm sitting in right now did exactly that. A skylight was added to a bedroom. Oddly, it was added on the east side, right over the bed, which means it wakes you up every morning. But the adding of that skylight was allowed with the Secretary of the Interior standards because it was not on the primary facade of the house. You cannot see it from the street. It's not visible. And generally with the standards of something, especially on a residential project, If something is not visible, generally it will be allowed. Now, whether or not you're going to get full QREs on that, that is something Fran would need to establish that with you. Again, how it's designed, how it's done, all of that, she could advise the best way for that to accomplish. She could also work with your architect on that.
Yeah, and Derek, that goes to the second question you had about bathrooms and if you are doing an interior bathroom renovation. The Secretary of Interior Standards, that's kind of the guidelines. Some of those standards are a little loose. It's things about replacing in kind or not creating a false sense of history. Usually there's a lot of flexibility with things like bathrooms or kitchens. These are things that are often changed. So even if you have a very intact bathroom or kitchen, again, going back to kind of the code discussion, if something's really not fitting a modern need, you can make some sort of argument to make them more. This is a rehabilitation credit. It's not necessarily creating a house museum.
There's the understanding, excuse me, Derek, there's the understanding that you're bringing this property in the present time as well. So you're not doing a Darwin Martin house restoration. You're not spending $53 million to make a house look like it did the day that it was built, because you're living in it today. So you can do things like replace cupboards, and you can do things, again, using this house that I'm in as an example. They did that with the kitchen, except that what they kept were the original glass front cupboards that were put in. But of course, back in 1928, they didn't have a lot of cupboards. So there were cupboards added that were, compatible with it, but obviously not original. And that's not, you get, as Derek said, the word is flexibility when it comes to bathrooms and kitchens. They give you a great deal of flexibility. Believe me, you do not need to put a toilet with the pull chain up above. That's not, but if you want one, you can, but that's not going to be required.
Great. Thank you, Tom. The next question we had was about it incentivizing landlords to use the commercial credit. And I'm going to just touch on this briefly, and then we can circle back to it because we have some specific questions that I think will be easier to address. But essentially, the commercial program has a lot more restrictions, in particular, a lot more hoops to jump through. And one of the biggest ones right at the start is what's called the substantial rehab test. So the homeowner credit has a similar one. It's just a much lower threshold. You have to spend $5,000. And this actually goes to a question that just came in by Ron here. $5,000 with 5% on the exterior, correct, Tom? It's not, is it 10%? 5%, yeah.
5% on the exterior, which is essentially paint your front door.
And so, it's a very, very low threshold. And so as long as you spend $5,000 and 5% of that is on your exterior, any of the work that you're doing as part of this application qualifies. So if you're doing your bathroom, you're putting in new coats of paint, you are changing out, certain elements in your kitchen, those are things that'll qualify. If you're doing this commercial program and let's say you're living in half and you're renting out the other half and you want to renovate that commercial component, you have to exceed what's called your adjusted basis. So if you've owned the house for a very long time, you might not be that big of an issue. But generally speaking, if you have a commercial property, you're depreciating that property over time, and you have this number that is the property's adjusted basis. This is the value of the building itself. So for most buildings, when you purchase them, that price is or the adjusted basis is pretty close to what your purchase price is. So using most neighborhoods in Buffalo, if you're buying a house for at least $150,000 to $400,000, you're gonna have to exceed quite a bit of basis. For the homeowner program, like I said, it's very straightforward. For the commercial credit, it's much more restrictive, and to the point where there is an interpretation of that substantial rehab test that suggests you have to expend that full $400,000 on just the commercial component. You don't necessarily get to cut it in half. So it's definitely a trickier kind of program to go through and to combine them. definitely not impossible, especially if you've either bought the house for relatively cheaply, or you've owned it for a long time and you've depreciated quite a bit, or you're in an area where you contribute a lot of value to the land, because part of this, the adjusted basis is figuring out it's just the building cost. You don't have to use land. But that's going really deep in the weeds, just to say that you can combine the commercial program and the homeowner program, but it's a lot more difficult for most people to be able to utilize both. We had a question here about a partial wall collapse when replacing a roof. In order to finish the roof, you need to repair the wall. Yes, yeah, though that's a qualified expense, we would advise updating your application with the SHPO, saying here's what happened. You send a picture and show show what is the additional work, and get that estimate into your application. And so that's definitely an eligible expense, as long as you're repairing it to what it was, or not changing it dramatically from what it was. That'll be an eligible expense. The next question is, can I start a restoration project at my house? What? Go ahead, Tom.
Before we get into that, I just want to say that last question addressed two things there. One is that an emergency situation, and the other an amendment. So yes, both of those things can be done. If you discover that a wall is collapsing while you're doing your work, that's an emergency situation. You contact Fran, and then the second thing is eventually you do an amendment for that when you for your final submission.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. That's important. You don't have to feel like, oh no, I can't fix this life safety issue because I need to get my amendment in. Definitely get it buttoned up, make it safe, get the work going, especially if you have a contractor who's available in this day and age, you get them going. But yeah, you get your application in afterwards. And then the last question we have here is, can I start a restoration project at a house I have bought but have not moved into yet? So if you're planning on moving into a house and it's not going to be income producing, it really becomes a question of how long the work is going to take, and when you're going to be moving in. But as I said, second homes are eligible for this. I would just reach out to Fran and explain the situation. And the biggest thing is making sure you have photos of the property before you do any work. So have as many photos before you do anything, showing what the condition was. That's the biggest process. Then we have one question about a list of architects that are recommended. We don't necessarily have anyone for our firm that we recommend. I don't know, Brandon, if PBN has a list of folks. I mean, generally speaking, we tell folks to work with whoever you're comfortable with and find someone who is going to work well with your project. If it's a big project, you might need a bigger firm. If it's something relatively minor or helping navigate at City Hall, you might even be able to get away with hiring a draftsman. But we don't necessarily keep a list on hand of folks that we recommend, especially because it varies so much with project to project. I don't know if PBN does.
I'd have to check. I think we do have some sort of running list of contractors. I also know the Preservation League of New York. They have a list on their website of ones that have their backing, and I think that carries some weight with it.
I could also mention that it's helpful if your architect has some experience doing this, but it's not required. As long as you have an architect who's willing to work with the SHPO and willing to take advice on how to do these things. In other words, an architect who skipped the EGO class in architecture school, as long as you get someone who's willing to do that, they'll be fine. You just have to follow certain procedures when you're doing it, and any architect is capable of doing that as long as they'll listen to what those procedures are.
And then, yeah, we have quite a few questions, kind of seemingly about commercial properties. And I would just say, if you have, especially questions about commercial properties, that's our bread and butter. Send an email to Tom at the email that's on the screen here, and we can, gladly just go through all of that program. It's a much kind of bigger animal than this one. So I would say trying to limit this to the historic homeowner credit because again the goal here is to demystify the homeowner credit program, get folks really kind of confident that they can tackle it on their own, and then maybe answer some common questions for commercial buildings or mixed use where it's multi units. If you want to send an email to Tom, we can kind of talk a little bit about that program, and maybe we'll schedule a follow up with PBN. That's a webinar related to the commercial credit. But yeah, again, just I see we have Derek, if you want to send us an email with some of the specific questions, because again, if it's income producing, it really is more of a commercial tax credit, and that does have a lot more kind of hoops to jump through. We have another question here. Can an interior bathroom project be combined with a window for the same bathroom to be considered the exterior work that is required? Yes, that's a perfect example. If you're doing the window for that bathroom, that's an exterior window. So yeah, that would totally qualify. Again, to Tom's point, it has to follow the Department of Interior standards. So if it's a wood window, sometimes it's a little tricky, especially with some of these old houses where they've been retrofitted and the windows might not necessarily be where you want them. But working with Fran on figuring out what's an appropriate solution for in some cases a window that's in a shower, definitely reach out. But it's a perfect example of finding something that is on the exterior to get that 5%. All right. Any other questions? Oh. Okay, perfect. How do you register a house and determine if it is a contributing structure? So yeah, Ryan, this is one of the first ones we tackled. This would be the easiest way is if you think you're in a historic district, reach out to Fran and just say, here's my address. I would love to find out if I'm contributing to this historic district. If you're not sure, there's lots of maps online, and we're actually in the process of trying to create an interactive map. PBN has an interactive map that they're working on that will allow you to zoom in on your property address, and it kind of is pulling data from the state's cultural resource inventory system. I don't know, Brandon, if you have any updates on that.
It's going to require a little bit more work. We had it live on the website for a couple of weeks, but we've been experiencing a few technical difficulties there. We're hoping to have that back up soon, though.
Great. Thanks, Brandon. So yeah, when that tool is back up in live, you can go to PBN's website and just zoom in on your street and see if your house has a little yellow dot, which will indicate that it should be eligible. There are a couple caveats to that, where a lot of the information that's in the state's database also includes properties that are eligible for listing but are not necessarily listed yet. So in some cases that can be a little tricky. For buildings that are eligible as part of a potential district, usually those districts then need to be created, which can be a lengthy process. In some cases, a building might be individually eligible, which is a little more straightforward, but it's still the National Register process takes a little bit of time and can be a little difficult to navigate on your own. But yeah, if the house is in Allentown, most of the historic houses in Allentown are eligible. And like I said, the easiest way to find out is to email Fran, give her your address, say I'm in the Allentown Historic District, but I'm not sure if I'm a contributing resource or not. And eventually PBN's resource will be back up. We're going to create a resource as well. But that right now, I would definitely say if you think you're in a historic district, or you're in a historic district, but you're not sure if you're contributing, reach out to Fran, give her your address. Do you have a contact? Yeah, Nate. So if this is do you have a contact for a duplex project to combine the residential and commercial as the dollar home example showed? If you want to reach out to Tom, on his email here, tomyachts@preservationstudios.com. We can definitely get you in contact with them if you're curious about how their process was. Mike will definitely be willing to kind of share their journey through the combined commercial and residential credit. But yeah, so I'd reach out to Tom Yachts at preservationstudios.com and we can get you in touch. All right. Any other questions? And like I said, if you have questions, you can send them to Tom. If you want to restore something on the interior only, residential rental, do I need to find something outside that is 5,000? So again, if it's a rental property, it's income producing, it's a commercial credit, which has a very different substantial rehab test. You have to exceed the suggested basis number. So if you've owned it for a long time, you've fully depreciated it, you spend a minimal amount of money on the renovation. If you just bought the property, it's usually you spend $1 more than what you renovated it for. So for a commercial, if it's a rental property, if it's income producing, it's a different math problem. If it's a homeowner property, it's $5,000, 5% of which is on the exterior. So those are the two kind of thresholds there.
It's just, excuse me, Derek, just to mention, the 5,000 is the minimum. The maximum for a tax credit, residential tax credit application is $250,000, which gives you a $50,000 credit because 20% of that. However, if you have a really, really big project that's going to be more than $250,000, you can submit more than one application. You don't have to do just one. So do that $250,000 worth of work and then do the rest of that work through another application at another time. And again, Fran can give you more information about how that's done, but there's no limit to the number of applications that you can submit for the work that you're doing. It's just that the maximum on a single application is $250,000, which would give you $50,000 in QREs. Now that's $250,000, excuse me, $50,000 in credits. That's $250,000 in QREs. So your project may involve other things like your garage or your yard or things that do not apply to the house itself, in which case they wouldn't count toward that 250,000 maximum anyway. But again, Fran can give you a lot more information about how to do multiple projects. And again, at any of you at any time, just email me and I'll be happy to get back to you.
Yeah. And along the lines of multiple applications, you can submit an application every year. So if you spend $5,000 this year on renovating the bathroom, and then next year your boiler goes out and you need to put in a new boiler, you can put in a new application next year, as long as you also paint a window or put in new storm door or something. So those are things where you can put an application every year. And one thing, there is a 2-year hold period. So to Tom's point, you spend $200,000 renovating your home, and now you have this $40,000 tax credit. If you move the next year, there are provisions to kind of pull back those credits. So this is it's intended for folks who are going to renovate these properties and live in the homes. But there are also provisions for passing those credits on to future buyers. There's a step in the shoes provision that definitely would reach out to Fran for particulars on. But the idea is that when you claim the credit, you're living in the house for at least 2 years. Here's a question about the tax liability. Tom, do you want to talk about the refundability for if your New York State tax liability for a tax year is less than your tax credit? Does it carry over? And if so, until used up in future years?
Yeah, if you have, there's two two answers to that. First of all, if your income is $60,000 or less, and your tax liability is less than your tax credit, you will receive it as a refund. So it'll be just like you receive a refund on your taxes if you've overpaid through your deductions. You would receive this as a refund. If your income is over $60,000, then you'll still get the money back, but you get it back by claiming those credits in the future. So if you claim up to the amount that you are allowed to with your credit liability, with the liability you have, and then you can just let it roll over into the next year and get the rest of your tax credit then. So it depends on what your income is. And if your income, as I say, is 60,000 or less, they're going to send you a refund.
Great, thank you, Tom. And the approval process, approximately how long does it take for review and approval? And the second part is, would it help to plan ahead? But I think focusing on the review and approval process timeline, and then we can talk a little bit also about end of year timeline requirements as well, and I can tackle that part.
Yeah, according to Fran, she expedites these because she understands that this is a homeowner who needs to get this project done. And she also understands that in most of New York State, you have a limited time in which to do this because of weather. So she said that she turns them around as fast as she can. She didn't give me an actual, like you'll get it back in so many days or so many weeks, but she said this is definitely an expedited process. So, and she would be able to give you, because it'll depend, she covers the whole state. So it'll depend on how many of them she has to review, but these are not super difficult to review. So definitely you will get this back much faster than you would if you were doing a commercial project.
And then the big thing is, if you're trying to claim these credits the year you're doing the work, making sure you have your Part 3 in before the end of the year. That's one of the big parts of this, actually being to claim the credit and show that you did this. So that's the, another timeline here where we recommend getting that Part 3 in before Thanksgiving at the end of the year. If you're trying to finalize a little bit of work, maybe you can reach out to Fran and just say, I'm just waiting for these things to be done. I'll take my pictures. But ideally you get your Part 3 in as soon as you're done doing your work, so that when you go to file your taxes, you have that Part 3 approval that said, I did all of this work. Here's how much I spent on it, and it's approved by the SHPO. So that's the big timeline kind of issue where, especially if you're trying to move, plan ahead, if you're going to do the work this year and you want to claim the credit for this year, getting that Part 3 in as soon as you're done. If you don't get it this year and you finish it, let's say you finish up your work and you start now and you finish the project that you applied for in January, you claim it for next year. Or let's say you start doing your work and you're like, I'm not actually going to get to this bathroom renovation, but I still hit the $5,000. You can still file that Part 3, claim your credit, and then apply for the bathroom next year. So definitely, if there's something with timing that you're concerned about, reach out to Fran. And I think Tom mentioned there is a box on the application that says, have you completed any work already? So if you have already started something, or if you're kind of already in the midst of this, you can fill in there saying, I already started a little bit of this. But yeah, definitely, this is timing is a little bit of an issue, but mostly on the back end, where if you want to claim the credits this year, you need that Part 3 in before the end of the year. The one question is, if I use historic tax credit to develop a property, at least partially, does it limit how much I can ask for rent? So this is more on the commercial side of things. No, this is the commercial credit is not tied to kind of any sort of rent control. So if you use the historic tax credit to renovate properties, it doesn't come with any sort of covenants or anything like that. In Allentown, so if you are in the Allentown Historic District, so this is a little trickier, right? So Allentown, Broadway Fillmore, Hamel Park, West Village, these are all local historic districts. that also have National Register Historic District status or are certified as historic districts. So the local approval process will be anything that requires a permit. And this application will be a completely separate approval process. So if you want to send this, your part 1 and part 2 into Fran and find out if it's eligible for the credits, you can do that well in advance of getting your permits. Obviously, if there's anything that you need a contractor to kind of have an approval in order to finalize a bid or to understand what your costs will actually be, that's a little bit of a caveat. But the local approval process for local districts and the homeowner tax credit are completely separate. But you can put your tax credit application in at any time, and yeah, Tom.
Yeah, I just want to speak to that. Having served on a Historic Preservation Commission for 9 years, I know a lot about this process. First of all, if your project is approved by the SHPO, that means that you followed the Secretary of the Interior standards. All of the local historic preservation laws ask you to do the very same thing. So you have a very good argument for getting approval, and by just saying, hey, look, I've got the State Historic Preservation Office telling me I'm following the Secretary of the Interior standards. That means I'm doing what you would want me to do. So number one, generally, whatever you're going to do that gets approved by the SHPO is going to get approved by the Preservation Board without an issue. But there are several things you're going to do that don't even require that they get approved by the Preservation Board. They can just be approved by the person in City Hall who handles these things, who is Chris Hawley. For example, that roof replacement, that's replacing in kind. You don't need to go through the Preservation Board for that process. Chris Hawley is able to do that. Gutters, that's replacing in kind. When my wife and I owned and lived in that house that you saw on the screen, we did a roof and gutter replacement. And when I went to apply, this is before I was on the commission, I went to apply for a certificate of appropriateness. I found out I didn't need one because that was just replacing in kind. So if that's what you're doing, you're not going to need to do that. Also, if you're in a locally designated property, it's only the exterior that's going to be affected. So that work that you're doing on your kitchen or your bathroom or your furnace or the carpeting you're putting down, that does not require approval from the Preservation Board. For example, the church that I belong to in Niagara Falls, in Buffalo, rather, the Unitarian Universalist Church, is doing some interior work. And I contacted the city just to make sure. And I was told, no, we only have purview over exteriors. So those things make it a lot simpler for you.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Yeah. And to use an example of something where it might be a little trickier is, let's say you are restoring a missing porch, or the windows were replaced at some point. You're going back to a more historic configuration. That's something where getting the local approval to make sure that you don't necessarily get this state approval for something that might actually prompt a pres board hearing. Definitely any major exterior changes are what might get you caught up in the pres board review. But as Tom said, for homeowner occupied properties, Chris Hawley, who's the preservation planner here in Buffalo, is very understanding. Well, so it's 6:35. I guess if there's one last question or something, we can answer that, and then we'll wrap up here. But we have our emails on the screen, and if you have any questions about this presentation, feel free to send them over. Otherwise, definitely reach out to Fran about anything that you might be wondering about. So as we said, she's awesome. She'll definitely be able to help you out. And if you have questions about the commercial program, feel free to reach out to us, especially because those can be a little more complicated and not necessarily as applicable to everyone. So let's see. Oh, no prior pictures exist. So thinking, if this is for a homeowner, it's really more about when you got the property. So what the existing conditions are. So if you've already done the work and you don't have any pictures of before, it's going to be difficult. And this is why they want you to submit these applications in advance. If it's a commercial property, again, this is probably more specific. We can talk about this via email, but if you've already done the work, it's very difficult to claim the credits in both, categories, especially in the commercial program. But thinking this before photos don't mean, what it was originally. It just means before you did any work. Obviously, if you have historic photos of a property, if you are trying to restore a missing feature, that's great. If you kind of want to bring back missing elements, and you have these photos, that's wonderful, and it's great a resource to kind of justify what you're hoping to do. But when we're talking about before photos, we're really talking about before any work was done. So, if you're thinking about going through this program and you're still getting your application materials together and you have something that comes up that needs to happen right away, take a picture of it. So if your hot water tank bursts, just take a quick shot before they rip it out. But if it gets swapped out, it's not the end of the world. But, definitely, when we're talking about before photos, we're talking before any work is done, kind of to show what the condition was before you applied. So that's really kind of how that should be taken. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to turn it back over to Tom and Haley and Brandon. And any other questions, definitely reach out via email. Or we'll see you next month.
I will just say I've enjoyed being able to do this with you, and I'm very sincere with my offer. Just shoot me an email and I will assist you in any way that I can. And I can assure you that Fran Stern will do the same.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you, Tom, Haley, and Derek for presenting tonight. I'd like to thank everybody that attended our virtual webinar. And yes, feel free to reach out with any questions you have. Reach out to us at PBN, reach out to Tom and his team at Preservation Studios, and reach out to Fran and her team at SHPO. We're here to help. We're here to help. We know this can be a little confusing, the labyrinth of tax credits, paperwork, architectural jargon, and whatnot. But we're here to work for you. We're here to help you out through this process. And just thank you for attending tonight. Just before we do go, a few things I'd like to plug. Consider getting yourself a PBN membership. You'll get invites to exclusive walking tours and architectural tours. We're launching a photography course / preservation exploration this summer. And where you've also launched a historic sort of happy hour pints and preservation. We're rotating between a number of different taverns throughout the area. Consider donating or volunteering with us. And lastly, I'd like to congratulate the Windspear Extension District. They are Buffalo's most recent district added to the National Registry. And I even saw Darren Cotton somewhere in this chat, and I know he was very involved with that with the University Heights Collective. But I think that's going to wrap this up. And thank you. I see somebody, where can I get a membership? You can find that right on our website. There's a separate tab for that. And with that, did anybody have any other closing remarks? Oh, thank you, Derek.
If anyone's still here, just put the link in the chat.
You're quick. All righty. Well, thanks again for coming out tonight. And
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you,
yeah,
everyone.
bye-bye. Let's save us some money.